Howdy folks, Jambariki here and welcome to another episode of ToonPod. In this edition, I'm going to discuss what it's like to make a student animation. I've made a student animation before and it's called Mel and the Devil's Deal. You can watch it on my YouTube channel or at my website jambariki.com. My intention behind this podcast is to make people feel confident about the student animations they make for university or for college or for school or wherever. So, Mel and the Devil's Deal was a horror stop-motion short. So yeah, I did rely on stop-motion puppets, but that doesn't mean that what I'm talking about is not going to be relevant to those who pick something like hand-drawn or CGI animation. It'll hold some kind of relevance to you, no matter what technique you go for. Now, the first piece of advice I have to give you is don't jump into the animation process. You need to give your animation an idea. It needs to have some kind of source material. It needs to start with something. And this idea needs to be imaginative and clever and unique. You need it to be fresh. You don't want it to be a clone of another formula. You don't want it to be an imitation of a well-known movie. The idea for your film should resonate within you. It needs to be something that you can feel passionate about. It needs to be something that's going to give your animated short an identity, a unique identity at that. The more personal your idea is, the more you'll be able to connect to your whole project. Your idea needs to be something that you can get passionate behind. You're going to be working on this animated short for some time, so you don't want your idea to be something that's half-arsed or something that you really don't care about. At the same time, don't try too hard to come up with an idea. Don't overwrite your idea or it'll become convoluted, complex, and complicated. It'll end up becoming something pretentious or something that'll go over the heads of the audience. With Mel and the Devil's Deal, I decided to go with a very basic premise. The idea of an animator making a deal with the devil. Sure, it's a simple idea, but it's something that I could play with, something I could be imaginative with. Okay, so you have an idea now. What do you do next? Well, you should start working on a screenplay or a storyboard, something that helps you plan out the story for your animated short. Because you'll need a narrative, or it'll just be a clumsy mess. I mean, you can't rely on just the idea. You have to think about the execution of that idea. I think that it's important to consider how long your animated short is going to be, because this will determine how many acts you're going to have and how you're going to structure your entire narrative for the short. Think about how you're going to introduce your premise to the audience, then extend that premise by playing around with it, and then have some kind of conclusion. You have to think about the pace of your animated short, because if you're not careful, your scenes may end up becoming long-winded, which will bore the audience, or they may end up becoming too fast, and that'll either confuse or irritate the audience. Another thing you would have to think about would be the characters, if you're going to have characters in your short. Now, if you are going to have characters, then you must come up with some identifiable people. You have to come up with characters that people will recognize, because you can't come up with a Shakespearean complex character for a 4 or 5 minute short. It's too much to get across in one little short. So, unfortunately, a lot of short animations have to rely on having one-dimensional characters. So, it does give you a limitation because you can't exactly develop them into something more than what they are, but it gives you a chance to think about characters that will stand out and shine in those couple of minutes. It's a challenge. For example, when I came up with the character of the devil, I wanted him to be suave and charming, but also intimidating and threatening. So I blended all these different tropes and personalities. I thought of having him being like a used car salesman, as well as being like a serial killer or a movie star. Once you've come up with your story and characters, it's time to make the script. Now, depending on what your brief calls for, it shouldn't matter too much how you lay out your script, unless the brief says, no, you have to have it in a traditional or professional style. If that's the case, then go online and just look about and try to find some professional Hollywood scripts, because there's a lot of drafts that have been leaked online, they've been put online, or there's been transcripts. So just go and look on those, because they will help you to understand how it's all set out. I can't exactly explain it through a podcast, unfortunately. Well, I don't think I'm capable of doing so. But anyway, moving on. Anyway, so yeah, script, it shouldn't matter too much as long as the voice actors can read it, as long as you can read it, as long as your tutor can read it, unless the brief calls for something specific. Next, you have to think about the visual design of your entire project. You have to consider the aesthetics and visual mood you're going to go with, because it'll set the tone. What you need to do to achieve this is go out and research. Go and watch different animated shorts. Go and watch different animated films. Look at paintings, look at comics. Try to feel inspired. Try to feel influenced by all the different styles that are out there to help you get an idea of what you want. Really soak up all the different art styles that are out there. However, you should treat your research as a starting point. It's important to be influenced and inspired, but at the same time, you don't want to duplicate the visual style of one of your favorite cartoons, because that'll just make your project look like a clone. You want to give your project its own visual identity, something that'll make it stand out. Make the style of your short one of a kind. I encourage you to make a mood board so that you can find the visual style you want to achieve. Now, a mood board is quite simple, and your tutor may encourage you to make one as well. It might be part of the brief. So, a mood board is a basic process. You take different things that come to mind when you think about the style of your project, and you get pictures of them, and you cut them out, and you place them on a board, and you have them scattered all over the board. And when you look at your board, you'll start to get a feel of what you want your short to look like. It'll inspire the colors and the design and the style that you want to go with. Okay, so the next thing you have to think about is the practical side of your project. What kind of things do you need? For example, my animated short needed stop motion puppets, handmade sets, and voice actors. A lot of people ask me, how do you get hold of voice actors? Well, it's easier than you think. It's all about casting calls and asking around. I often try to rely on really big names to get involved with my student animations. At first, I wasn't interested in doing that because I already know loads of different amateur voice actors, but then my tutor said, take a chance, challenge yourself, go out and ask someone that you really want to be in your student animation. And so I have started doing that ever since. That's the technique I've kind of gone with. But I also work with amateur voice actors as well. So, some of you may be wondering, well, how do I get big name stars in my student animation? Well, what I do is I simply ask them. I try to find a way of contacting them, which will either be Facebook, Twitter, or email. There's all kinds of ways you can try and contact these people. As someone that has spoken to a lot of celebrities, I can confirm that a majority of famous people are more humble than you think. They are not scary. They are just as human as you are. I've met celebrities that are incredibly self-conscious even, and they worry about what you think of their work. So don't be afraid to get a famous voice actor involved with your student animation, because most of them are very polite and friendly. Go ahead. There's not going to be any dangerous repercussions. They're not going to hire a hitman or sue you or anything. So just take that risk and see if they're interested in your projects. They might just be. I've been very lucky because my next student animation is going to star some really big names. However, if you don't want to make that risk, or if you really don't want to work with a professional Hollywood voice actor, then there are alternatives. Try holding auditions online. You can try a website called Voice Acting Alliance, which is free and brilliant. You can hold auditions on there, or you can make a YouTube video that holds auditions, and you can work with video responses to see people's auditions. If you don't know what a voice actor audition video looks like, then just go on YouTube and find one, because there are loads. There are tons, particularly for fan dubs. If none of these methods work, then feel free to message me and I will happily lend my voice to your student animation because I love to voice act. I've lent my voice to a couple of student animations, and I'm going to be in Yeizo Otaku's radio drama of Fruits Basket at some point. Now, what about the puppets? Well, the puppets were handmade. I crafted them myself, and I kind of relied on different materials that I could get hold of. I asked my tutor what was the best way to make the puppet. I think the most important thing for a stop motion puppet is that it can move. You make sure that it can move and make sure that once it's moved, it doesn't move back. You also have to consider, does it stand up? It's so important that it can stand up. At the same time, can it walk forward? There's so many things you have to consider with your puppet, so just experiment with it. Try to do some character animation tests before you go into the animation process. The same thing can be applied to a CGI puppet. You have to think about what kind of things you can do with this CGI puppet and what kind of things will happen when you tug at different things. As for the sets, well, they were handmade, but not by me. I had to rely on my dad to get them made. I decorated the sets a bit, but the actual building process was in the hands of my dad. If you're going to have handmade sets, then you need to have a background in building with wood and have a knowledge of how to use these tools. If not, then rely on someone that does. Okay, so once you have your script, your designs, your puppets, your sets, your props, all that stuff, once you have everything ready, you can now jump into the animation stage. Now, I can't really go into much detail about the animation process in this podcast because I would need visual demonstrations to serve me, to help me, to aid me. So I'm going to give a little advice. I'm going to give suggestions that I'll be able to talk about in a podcast format. So, one thing to consider is the personality of your characters. You have to think about how you're going to move the characters and how that movement will capture the charisma and personality of your characters. You have to turn that puppet into an actor. So you have to think about what kind of mannerisms and distinct behavior can be attached to each of your characters. If you end up having your characters all behave the same way, then it's going to look a bit boring. You need to be able to capture your characters' identity within their movement. You really have to capture the heart and soul of each character using their puppet, or using their drawing, or using their CGI model. Another important thing to think about for the animation is the pace of the animation. You have to think about the pace for many reasons. You don't want it to be too fast or it'll become annoying, and you don't want it to be too slow or become boring, just like the story. So what you have to think about is pauses and timing and all these different factors. Like, if you make your character move constantly, then it'll become irritating and it'll become difficult to focus on the character because they are so hyperactive. So you have to think about pauses, because remember that we all pause to think. So don't rely on just wacky gestures and eccentric movement to get across your character's emotions or feelings, because little subtle movements and brief pauses will show how alive your character is. Trust me, those little moments, they will really give your character some organic life. Now, don't worry about retakes, because retakes are a good thing. The more you do something, the more you'll be able to lead yourself to better ideas. It's fantastic, trust me. You're going to come across mistakes and problems. I mean, when I was making Mel and the Devil's Deal, my puppets kept falling over or breaking. The camera smashed twice. So yeah, you're going to come across issues, but you have to find a way around those problems. Don't worry. Don't think like, oh, that's it, my project is over, or that's it, I'm doomed, I'm never going to get this finished by my deadline. Don't worry. Everyone comes across problems. It's just a matter of getting around them. We all come across obstacles in whatever we do. I also encourage you to really take on criticism during your animation process. Whatever you're animating, show what you've done so far to friends, family, your tutor, your classmates, anyone at all. because you need to let your pride go and have your work so far judged so that you can get around any mistakes or flaws you've generated so far. If you end up relying on criticism during the finished result once it's put up online or screened, then you're going to kick yourself, because then you're going to notice all these mistakes that other people have pointed out, and you won't be able to fix them. So try to notice these flaws early with the help of other people. You can't be cocky about this, okay? You can't think that you're the world's greatest animator or the next Richard Williams. You have to remember that you're a student animator and you're in the learning process. Now, some of you may be wondering, how do I sync up my voice actors' recordings to my characters' mouth movements? Well, it's all a matter of relying on something called a dope sheet. You can find examples of a dope sheet online. You can print off copies of a dope sheet structure online. They're everywhere online, okay? So, a dope sheet, I can't exactly demonstrate how it works, so it's best to look up a how-to guide online, but dope sheets are the key. Making a dope sheet is a tedious process, I won't lie. It's a matter of listening to your voice actor and you write down what sound he makes every couple of seconds. Yes, it does sound incredibly boring, but it's very important and you're going to really appreciate it during the animation process because it will help you determine which mouth position to use for each frame while your character is talking. The animation process is going to take a very long time. It took me 4 months to animate Mel and the Devil's Deal. I think for the benefit of your sanity and health, you should take breaks now and again. Not too often, because that'll just hold back your schedule, but you should take breaks. You should pause to have a little bit of fun or a little bit of rest. I would work for ages, and then once my legs became heavy because I didn't have a chair, I would sit down in my chair and just go off and see other people's work or just chat to people that were on their breaks as well. And we would often listen to cartoon theme songs or we would discuss our favorite cartoons, and it was just a really great atmosphere, and that atmosphere would inspire me and motivate me to carry on animating. I think that it's very important to feel comfortable and relaxed while you're animating, because if you're feeling uncomfortable or in pain while you're animating, it will affect your animation, trust me. So you have to feel happy, optimistic, and relaxed while you animate. To achieve this, I pretty much listened to stuff while I was animating. This includes music, documentaries, or cartoons. These things not only kept me calm and sane, but they also inspired and motivated me. Especially when I listened to music, I would often listen to horror music while animating my animated horror short. It would help me think about the imagery and atmosphere of my project. So, what about the editing process? Well, I'm not going to dictate what editing software you use. Pick the editing software that you feel comfortable with, the editing software that you feel confident with, the one that you feel as if like you can jump into and cut with right away. The kind of editing software that you can use to polish your entire project. However, try not to rely too much on incredibly simple softwares because they will give you limitations and you will have high expectations for your animation. It has to come across as very professional. So maybe use your simple or basic editing software for little things like chopping and cutting, but when you want to polish it with other things like adjusting the ratio or color correcting or anything like that to help your project look a bit better, or effects or whatever, then use a more complicated editing software. The editing software I went with for Mel and the Devil's Deal was Adobe Premiere, which is fantastic. It can be a pain because you have to render so many times, but it's still great to use. I'm not going to spend the rest of this podcast explaining how you use Premiere, but I will encourage you to use it. Now, I love editing because it can help you to see your project come to life. It'll also help you to decide the pace of your project and how you'll tell your story. The editing stage is also a point for you to start putting in your sound and music. Now, with your sound effects, You can either make them by hand through Foley art by using stuff around you, or you can find sound effects online, which is pretty easy. Some sound effects may cost money, but if you are willing to pay for it, then go ahead. It might be worth it. But if you're not willing to pay for it, don't bother. Go off and find a different sound website. Anyway, so with your sound effects, make sure they sound clear and make sure that they enhance the visuals. Of course, your animation should speak for itself, but at the same time, the sound can really help the visuals. So be really careful about the sound you choose or the sound you make. It has to be very good. You don't want your sound to be too quiet, too loud, or too distorted. So it's important to play back your entire animated short and listen carefully to all the sound. Make sure the level's all right. Make sure you can hear the characters. Make sure you can hear the sounds when they need to be heard, okay? To achieve this, you should play it back on some big speakers so that you can hear every detail. So what about the music? Well, the music is something that you have to consider quite early. You have to think about what kind of genre or style you're going to go with because it will influence the mood of your entire piece. So how do you get music? Well, if you make music yourself, then make music yourself. Go ahead. If you can do it, then do it. Don't be afraid. If you can't make music, then search for composers online. Try to contact composers online. Type into a search engine like composer official website and you'll be able to find someone. Have a listen to their work, though. That's really important. You don't want to just pick them just because they're a composer, because their work might be really terrible or they might not be what you're after. When you contact your composer, then you should give them an animatic to work with so that they can time their music to your short. This is why it's really important to have your animation fit the timing of your animatic. It'll reflect how the music will match up with your animation. Now, how do you direct a composer using an animatic? Well, what I did is I had my animatic up and then I had subtitles underneath my animatic that would display what kind of emotion or musical style I wanted at each point. Don't tell your composer what to exactly compose. Don't just send a message saying, I want my music to sound like this. No, that's not your job. That's the composer's job. You have to let their imagination go free. You just have to let them know what kind of mood or emotion or genre or style you want and let them be inventive, okay? But at the same time, feel free to criticize what they send you because that's the only way for you to both communicate with one another. Think about what you want to have, what music you have in mind, and if your composer doesn't achieve what you've imagined, then don't be afraid to say what you really want. Or if you've changed your mind, then let them know. Just make sure that they can achieve the music that you have in mind. If your composer has a hissy fit because you don't like the music that they've sent, well, then they're being childish, so sod them and find a more adult composer. You should send references to your composer. It's a good way of communicating your imagination to your composer. If you find original soundtracks or instrumentals that really matches the music you have in mind, then send them to your composer because then he'll have a good idea of what you want. The music for Mel and the Devil's Deal was a mix of different contributions. There was music by myself, and there was music by my friend Dark Static, plus there was music by a composer called Skitch. Now, Skitch is a gentleman who does music for thatguywiththeglasses.com. He's best known for orchestrating the new theme song for Nostalgia Critic. So yeah, I was really lucky to work with him, and he's incredibly talented, so he had an idea of what I wanted. It's also important to consider what kind of music you're going to have for your end credits, because the credit music can help enhance the after feeling that your audience will have once they've watched your short. I worked with a very talented internet composer called Okoroid, who came up with a really haunting and creepy end credit piece. So that's how you make an animated short for academic purposes. I hope that I've covered everything. If I've missed anything out, then feel free to ask any questions because I'm happy to answer them. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Feel free to subscribe to my channel to check out similar things, and I encourage you to also follow my Facebook and Twitter, which are twitter.com/jamboree and facebook.com/jamboree. Cheerio, folks, and good luck with your student animations.